What's good, yo? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanoz, aka Coach V, and I bring you our last season preview for this 2023 season. At this point, I think we're getting it a little close here, but still before week one here, or technically it's still before week one. And so we got 3A teams, some 2A teams to talk about some of the best football here in Colorado. And per usual with all these season previews, for every single team, we're going to talk about how last season went, talking game by game in regular season and playoffs. And then we're going to talk about the graduating seniors / departures or transfers. There are a couple of those that every single team is losing, before talking about key players that each squad will be returning here and their impact in this 2023 season, which will usually be big for those teams. And we're not going to be able to talk about every single player, but we'll talk about the key ones moving forward, as we do have about 10 teams to talk about on this one. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and predict how their season's going to go. I'm going to go game by game, say that's a win, that's a loss, and then at the end, I'm going to have a predicted record for each team, at least based on the schedule that they have released as of today, July 20th / July 21st. So we'll talk about all of that there. And then I'll also give them a window of wins, which is just basically a range of wins that I expect teams to finish in during the regular season. So just so that it's clear, it's regular season, not playoffs here. Because once you get into playoffs, I think it's a lot more unpredictable, and we really can't be predicting that far into the future. During the summer, at least, right? We'll do that whenever the season is a little bit closer here, though. But with that being said, before we hop into the first one, I actually have a little breakdown here. So I predicted the records and gave window of wins for every single team on here on this episode, all 10. And so I kind of broke them down into a couple different categories here. All right. So out of the 10 teams, 2 of the teams I'm going to talk about, which, by the way, all the teams I'm going to talk about on this episode: Lutheran, Evergreen, Conifer, Green Mountain, Littleton, Lewis Palmer, Alameda, Denver West, Englewood, Kent, Denver. Those are going to be the 10. All right. But out of those 10, 2 of these teams got records in the regular season that I predicted exactly right, as in I got the number of wins exactly right there. And then 5 more out of those 10 also have records that were within the window of wins that I predicted for them last season. So that's a pretty good number. I'm not going to lie, already the majority that I was at least in the ballpark about. And then there's 1 team who was within 1 game of the window of wins. So not quite in the ballpark, just outside the neighborhood. Is I'd say, I predicted them having a window of wins anywhere between 4 and 6. Maybe they got 3 wins. Maybe they got 7 wins. I was just a little bit off there, all right? And then there are 2 teams that I was just wrong about, and I openly admit to that. It's on paper here, and, it's on audio on the record. So there you go there. Those are all the teams. I guess that's a quick breakdown of all the teams that I did a little, preview on last season. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this one. Okay, to start, we got Conifer here. I predicted them to go 5-5, and they went exactly 5-5, and I actually predicted their entire schedule correctly here. So let's just go down the line, starting with Fort Morgan. That was a big time dub, a close one, but they beat them 13-10. So obviously you would take that. Then they go away and play Glenwood Springs. That's a tough one that they dropped 41-27. They play Summit at home. That's another one that they dropped 37-14. Then they go bounce back with a win over Eagle Valley 28-14. Then they go play away at Holy Family, which is a loss 28-7, but bounce back with the win over Wheat Ridge 33-13. A back and forth schedule here so far. And then following that, they played Green Mountain, who they got blown out by 36-0. But then would go ahead and play Littleton here. And I was actually at this game for a little bit, where they made a statement win here, a big one, winning 65-22 in this one. They were without a couple players, but still, you take all the wins you can in this league. They will then go play Skyview the next week there and beat them 55-20 before losing to Evergreen on the road here 41-0. So altogether, they had a solid year here. I knew it would be a year where they would continue to be building and whatnot. And so now with that under their belt, they move on to the 2023 season here. And by the way, they did barely miss the playoffs. I didn't think they were going to make it, as they were like 2 teams in their league that I for sure felt like was going to make it, in Green Mountain and Evergreen. And so that was definitely going to be a crowded and tough group to come out of. So there you go there. But before we talk about the players that will be moving on with them, let's talk about the players that will be moving on from them here, as in graduation, starting with their starting running back, Nick Hudson here. Here's their lead rusher with 661 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. Brought some good stability, to the team. And so that production will definitely be missed there. They also miss Evan Clark, who was an offensive weapon just in general for Conifer. I mean, he ran for 100 yards and 6 touchdowns, on only 30 carries for Conifer, while also catching about 15 receptions here. Let me find that real quick. 15 receptions for 208 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns as the second leading receiver. So altogether, I mean, he's definitely someone that will be missed. And then on defense, he was key there as well. 51 tackles, 5 sacks, and was the second leading tackler and second in sacks. So altogether, I mean, that's just a very good all-around player that you are losing. And so that'll be tough to replace there. They're also having to replace Austin Nolmeyer. He had 42 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks as their 6'2" defensive tackle. He was an absolute beast for Conifer, and his production will also be missed. And then on top of that, there are also a couple other guys I want to shout out here. They're losing tackle Sebastian Bett, lineman Caden White, and center/linebacker Trenton Wiltz, I want to say, or Wiltsey. So definitely losing a couple guys. But on defense, it's not that bad. Only losing 4 of their top 13 tacklers as they return the majority there. But they do lose Clark, who was second in tackles, and Nolmeyer, who was 4th in tackles. And I guess Wiltsey was also 5th in tackles. So there you go. And then on offense, I mean, it's really just Hudson and Clark in your skill group that they are graduating. And so with that being said, let's talk about the players that they are moving on with here into this 23 campaign, starting with Grady Forsyth, the Air Force commit, the 6'4", 210-pound defensive end tight end. He had a breakout season. He was the lead receiver with 460 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns on 34 receptions. And then on defense, he was a force as the lead tackler with 77 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 7 sacks, leading the team in tackles and sacks here. He's already committed at this point, and so he's looking to go ahead and, leave a big mark here in his senior year for Conifer, as he is, or he has been, a special player for them. In addition, they bring back their quarterback, Wyatt Nichols. He'll be a senior this year, but last year was his first year starting, where he threw for a solid 856 yards, 10 touchdowns to 7 picks, while rushing for 3 touchdowns. Like I said, a solid quarterback, right? But going into his second year with this group, he should continue to get better. And I mean, I did look over his film. Like I said, solid. Would like to get or just see him continue to get better and improve and really work at the craft here, and take another step forward, because I think he can. I like his throwing motion. He's solidly athletic. There's a bit more you can get out of him, and I think he has a lot of that to prove going into his senior year, and it helps having a big target in Grady Forsyth to throw to as well, and so that's a good one to be bringing back. They also bring back Jackson Kosar. The 6'2", 180-pound athlete was their second leading rusher with 357 yards and 2 touchdowns, while catching 11 receptions for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns as well through the air. And so with Clark and Hudson gone, this is definitely an athlete that could fill the void here and be a good option next to Forsyth in the passing game or in the running game. And then last but not least, they also bring back Benson White, the 6'2", 180-pound incoming junior, will be returning to this defense after amassing 45 tackles and 2 interceptions in a year where he was the interception leader. And he'll be returning with a pretty experienced defense that is returning the majority of their starters from last year. So, Conifer in general, I look at this team and I'm like, all right, you definitely got some pieces on offense to work with here. You know what you have in Forsyth. He's a baller, right? By the way, I also think he was an all-playmaker guy for us at tight end on the 3A levels. So there you go there. He's going to be big time. Also for us, probably a top 5 senior guy as well. He's going to do his thing. Wyatt Nichols, I mean, you saw a solid amount from him. I think you know what you have here, but I still think he could continue to get better and elevate this offense to another level and put them into another gear, and so that'll be big. Same with Jackson Kosar. You kind of know what you have there, but with guys leaving, that opens up opportunities for him to, be a big-time athlete for them. And so the offense, I think, will be solid there. Are some holes at lineman that they got to fill, but I think it'll be fine. And then you have an experienced defense, just straight up. An experienced defense that you kind of hope takes a step forward here. And I think they will. But let's go ahead, talk about their schedule here for this 23 campaign. To start out on Friday, August 25th. I think at the time this releases, we'll be just a couple days away from that. They go ahead and play Fort Morgan. Last year, it was a low-scoring game. And honestly, I like this duo of Nichols and Forsyth, and I think they find a way to go ahead and get it done and win this game. It could potentially go the other way if Fort Morgan takes significant strides as well, as they were a young team last year, but I like this Conifer defense a bit more. I think they got a little bit more experience here, and so I have a lot of faith in them. Plus, they played better, I think, last season. And then Nichols and Forsyth, they're going to be tough to beat, so there you go. Then they play Glenwood Springs here at home. I think that's going to be a loss. This should be a very good game, though, and it will be important for both teams when it comes to postseason considerations. But Glenwood Springs they bring back their backfield that won them their game, while Conifer loses guys like Clark and Hudson, who were important in that game as well. And so I just think in this game, Conifer needs a little bit more firepower to beat them. Either that or their defense does have to take a significant step forward. Maybe not too significant, but a solid step forward to really challenge them and make this a closer game here. But for now, I'm going to call it a loss here. It's definitely winnable, though. Then they play Summit. I think this is a win here. Summit, they lose a lot between their star quarterback, between Eli Krawchuk, who was, top 5 senior defensive tackle for us. And honestly, I think this is a good game for Wyatt Nichols to have a signature game in. I think this could be the one, and so we'll just have to see. It is away, though, but I think this is definitely a winnable one. Then they play Eagle Valley. They didn't have Nichols last year, and they still beat him. I think they do the same with him this year. Following that, though, they play Holy Family. I don't think they're going to win this game here. They just got a little bit more here. Plus, I think their defense is a little bit better. So I think that's a loss. Wheat Ridge, though, should be a dub. Green Mountain will be tough as they return some big boys up front. We'll talk about them later in this episode. And so they're still going to be tough to beat. And so unless this defense is just really good this season and completely shut down the rushing attack, which I don't think they'll be able to do, I just think this is going to be a loss for them. Then they play Littleton here. This is going to be a younger team, new coaching staff. That really should be a win. Following that, they play Skyview. I think that's a win there. And then they play Evergreen. Evergreen, we're going to talk about literally right after Conifer here. And so I don't know. Evergreen's just losing a little bit too much. There's not a lot of continuity going over there. I think that's a very winnable game. And so altogether, I have Conifer going 7-3 with the window of wins anywhere between 5 and 8. Going into this 2023 campaign, I think this season really depends on how well Wyatt Nichols plays and if he can get playmakers other than Forsyth involved here to really produce for this offense. Now on the defensive side of the ball, they should be solid with a lot of experience as they return guys surrounding Forsyth who got some pretty good, reps last year. And, Forsyth, he's going to do his thing there as well. So I think this defense is going to be pretty good there. And so I think this team really can get to at least 500, if not over it, and probably make the playoffs here. Beating Evergreen, I think, is going to be really important. That could even potentially be a trap game because I don't know if they're going to beat Green Mountain. And I think Glenwood Springs might affect their playoff chances as well. So they really need to beat one of the three here between Green Mountain, Glenwood Springs, and Evergreen. And I think Evergreen is definitely the more winnable game there. Even then, I don't know if that guarantees them a playoff spot, but I think that puts them in as good a position as possible. Most likely, if you could also beat Evergreen and Glenwood Springs, that would go a long way in solidifying their spot in the playoffs. So we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Okay, now moving on, let's go ahead and talk about Evergreen here. I mentioned them in the last segment. And so on this one, let's go ahead and talk about them. I predicted them going 9-1 last season. Instead, they finished 8-2 here, just one game below my predicted record for them. But I did give them a window of wins between 7 and 10. So even though they were below my prediction, they're still in the ballpark, right? They're definitely still in the ballpark. So let's go ahead and talk about it here. To start here, they took care of Battle Mountain 56-8, but then they play Northridge here, and this was a game that I was at, and I said this would be a toss-up game, but I predicted it as a win here. Definitely winnable, and this was a game that kind of got away from them to start, and then Tommy Pacholski led a legendary comeback here to really scrap them back into it, and it came down to the final seconds where, they were on the goal line within 5 yards, had 4 chances to get in, and, I'm just going to say there's real questionable coaching, and I would not have made the decisions they did, but those decisions definitely led them to getting stuffed on the line and losing a very winnable game there, so that's obviously tough there. But they would bounce back, and actually from there, everything else that I would predict from their schedule would be correct. That Northridge game was the only one I got wrong, so there you go. But anyways, they would bounce back, beat Eagle Valley 48-0. Discovery Canyon, they would beat them by the same amount, 48-0. Beat Severance by a lot here, 41-8 here. Then they played Green Mountain. This was another game that I attended here live, and this was a close one here. They lost, unfortunately, in double overtime, 24-23. This time, there were just some mistakes by some players here, and it happens, right? But, it's just a regular season game. It's fine, though. That was a tough one they lost. It could have been winnable. They just started a little bit too sloppy, though, honestly. So, there you go. But they would go ahead and bounce back, beat Littleton 56-0, Skyview 61-6, Wheat Ridge, a record 70-7 here. Tommy Pacholski, he set some records in that one, I want to say. Then they also blew out Conifer 41-0. In the playoffs, they would go ahead and win their first playoff game in a really long time, since 2015 here, and they would go ahead and survive Thompson Valley, beating them 16-13. I watched some of that game. That was just a real gritted out type of game there, and so you gotta love how that went. But then they would go ahead and play Roosevelt in Johnstown. It looked like they were really hanging in there, but Roosevelt would pull away in that second half. So that's a bit closer than what the score looks, but they would fall to Roosevelt 48-20, and Roosevelt obviously would go on and win it all here in 3A. But altogether, I mean, if you're Evergreen, I still think it was a successful year. Didn't go to state like you thought here, but you really gave Roosevelt a good run for their money. And, you won your first playoff game in a really long time. That was kind of something that's been on their backs for a minute here. I know Griffin Loretano had his struggles there. So, there you go. But let's go ahead and let's talk about the players that are leaving here as they are graduating. They're pretty much graduating everyone, honestly, but we're still going to talk about the key players that they are losing here, starting with their quarterback, the Iowa commit Tommy Pacholski. He was a top 5 senior quarterback for us, all Playmaker guy for us. I know he was an MVP candidate for us as well, I want to say. So there you go there. I mean, for good reason too. I mean, he lit it up, and the crown jewel to his senior year was an 8-touchdown performance against Skyview, which is now a school record. I also believe he set records in touchdowns in a season and career touchdowns for Evergreen, which is big because they've had, a good quarterback in Griffin Loretano not too long ago come through as well. And so that's huge. But on the season, he threw for 2,622 yards, 37 touchdowns to 7 picks, while also rushing for 417 yards and 8 touchdowns. Like I said, on his way to being an MVP candidate for us and an all-playmaker quarterback. And so, honestly, he was a guy that put Evergreen in positions to win when they probably didn't deserve to do that. And so this will be an incredibly difficult spot to fill once more. It's rare that you hit on 3 straight great quarterbacks. Yeah, I mean, just in general, I can't even really think about a program that's had 3 straight quarterbacks make our top 5 seniors list. But also, we haven't been around that long yet, right? So I totally get that. But having a 3rd straight will definitely be anything short of a miracle, honestly. But on top of that, they also lose Russ Woodward, the 6'6", 230. I think he's a little bit heavier than that. But, 230-ish pound Army commit. Had a stellar season. He made our all-playmaker spot as an athlete and was one of the first linemen out of 2 to do it, along with Lyman's Traden Marks here, to make our all-playmaker spot, not at just linemen, but also defensive linemen as well. And so he took our athlete spot that we reserve for the best athletes here every year. And so that was obviously big time and well-deserved, as on defense he had 77 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, which I feel like is a lot less than what he actually had. And he was just a menace, for this team. And, he also made our top 5 seniors list as an offensive tackle, but we'll be playing edge rusher on the next level. This is a guy that, is super versatile, aggressive. He really set the tone for a lot of games. That's going to be a tough one to lose as well, just like Tommy. And so losing both of those guys will be tough. In addition, they lose other guys like Gabe Zimmerer. He was their best running back, one of the best in 3A, honestly, and he rushed for 1,031 yards and 11 touchdowns, while also catching 41 receptions for 425 yards and 7 touchdowns. And then defensively, he was also a force over there with 71 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, along with 8 pass deflections. He is one of the best athletes on a squad full of them, for sure. Another one I want to talk about is Kyle Solowitz. He was their lead receiver with 43 receptions, 465 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And he was an all-playmaker safety with 40 tackles and a team / I believe 3A high 9 interceptions last season. So there you go there. That's a big one to be losing. Speaking of big ones to be losing, they also lose Jordan Turnbull, their 6'4", 210-pound defensive end. He had 59 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. Just absolutely killing it on the other side of Russ Woodward here. He will be attending Wyoming. He has committed to them next season and will be the 3rd D1 prospect for Evergreen that will be playing football on the next level. So there you go, man. That's tough. And they also lose their inside linebacker, Jack Johnson, who had 151 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, and was an all-playmaker linebacker for us once more. And so once more, again, this production will be tough to replace. But honestly, just in general, Evergreen, I believe, is the only team in Colorado, at least the only one that I've covered, that is graduating all 13 of their top tacklers. So not only are they graduating their starters, but they're graduating a couple backups or rotational guys as well. So there's barely anybody on this team that got a snap on varsity, or at least made a stat and got a snap on varsity there, right? And then on offense, they don't return any skill player who amassed over 100 yards. So that means they're losing their top 4 rushers, their top 7 receivers, their quarterback, obviously, along with 2 of their offensive linemen, at least, one of them being Russ, who is their left tackle. So they do return a couple linemen, but that's it. So this is going to be a very green, extremely green, ironically, evergreen squad here going into this season. But let's talk about a couple players here, right? Let's start with Drew Phillips. As a sophomore, he was a 6'4", 210-pound defensive end / tight end. Now, I don't know if he could contribute right away, but I think moving forward here, he's definitely somebody to look out for to help fill a spot, whether it's on offense or defense there. They also bring back Hudson Steber here. He finished just outside the top 13, but the 6'2", 225-pound incoming junior defensive tackle / offensive tackle collected 20 tackles on defense. So look for him to probably start on the offensive line if he's not already there. And, get some good playing time on defense, as he is one of the few returners who got snaps over there, varsity snaps over there. But I do like his game, though. I think I did add him to our watch list. He's definitely a guy to look for moving forward. And then last but not least, they also returned Logan Snow Record. He was one of the other linemen at 6 foot, 205 pounds, who will be a senior here. And he also recorded like 4 tackles. So he's maybe another possible contributor moving forward here. But other than that, it was just really hard to find film of anybody else because they were so senior heavy. Probably one of the most senior heavy teams in the entire state, regardless of class. So we're just going to have to see what happens here. Alright, yeah, we're just going to have to see what happens here. But to start, let's go ahead and go to their schedule here. It has changed, I will say that. At least from when I last looked at it, they had 12 games scheduled originally. But now they have 10, so I think that works. But we're just going to go game by game here. So to start, I got them going ahead, and they play Northridge here to start their season. I think that is going to be a loss. Both teams are losing a ton, mind you, and it could go either way, but Northridge is losing a lot less than Evergreen is. They're not losing, entire starters basically like that, as they do return a solid amount. So I'm going to go with them, giving them the slight edge because they have the continuity there. Then they play Eagle Valley. I think that should definitely still be a win here. Yeah, they're still better than Eagle Valley. I'll give them that. Then they play Discovery Canyon following that. This will be probably a closer game, but I like Evergreen a little bit more than Discovery Canyon in general. And DCC, they're also losing a lot of guys too. They haven't been decent in a while. I could be off base here, though. I could be off base, but I feel like they're going to beat him. So, there you go. Following that, they play Severance away. Severance, I think, will be a lot better if they're healthier. So, I think that's a loss there. Palisade, that's another team losing a lot here. But they have one of the simpler systems that kind of just allow them to plug and play guys. So, I feel like that's going to be, more of a win for Palisade, if anything there. Plus, it's in Palisade, too, so there you go. Green Mountain, I think that's a loss. They return a really big offensive line, which should be some trouble for them. Littleton, I think they could beat there. It should be a closer matchup, but I'm going to still give Evergreen the edge. Skyview should be a win. Wheat Ridge should be a win. Then they play Conifer at the end here. Maybe this is a game they win, but Wyatt Nichols and Forsyth are going to be tough to beat, plus their experienced defense. I just don't know if they're going to win this one, so I think it's going to be a loss. Altogether, though, I have them going 5-5 with the window of wins between 4 and 7. I will say their losses are extremely concerning, and we just have to see basically a brand new Evergreen squad here. Just join the mix and see who emerges, because it's really up to anybody to emerge at this point. They're basically starting fresh, right? It's a hard reset here. And so that makes them extremely unpredictable, as a lot of these new faces barely got any varsity experience, if some at all. And so I think playing teams like Wheat Ridge, Eagle Valley, Skyview, those should really be wins. So I think they should have at least, 4 wins there, at least 3 wins there. I think they'll beat someone else as well. But I think those 3 for sure will be wins. And then after that, it just really depends on what happens from there, and what kind of rate this team can grow together at, because I think they're going to be doing a lot of learning this season. And you know what? That's okay. So it's going to be a little bit of a rebuilding year for them, but I think they'll be fine. You just got to give it a little bit of time here. So we'll just see what happens. Okay, now moving on here, let's talk about Green Mountain. I had them going 9-1 with the window of wins between 7 and 10. Instead, they went undefeated here, doing just one game better than I predicted, but still in my window of wins here. So there you go there. I think the only game that I got wrong was their Severance game here, which they beat 42-0, but that was a team that were suffering through some injuries. I still think they would have won that one, though. looking back, which, hindsight's 2020. But let's look back at this regular season here and playoffs later. But to start out, they won their away game here, or I think it was away, against that St. Petersburg team, Hollins, 47-0. Then they beat Severance, which, like I said, I couldn't have possibly predicted, at least not in that time, 42-0 there. Then they would beat Mountain View 31-6, Pueblo South 48-0, Meade 43-7. They beat Evergreen in that double overtime game 24-23, where they really just grinded it out. I think that was really when we all knew that they would be a big-time contender, and we kind of knew that in the preseason as well, but that was a big statement one there. Following that, they beat Conifer 36-0, Wheat Ridge 56-7, Littleton 65-0, Skyview 56-18, that was in the playoffs. But yeah, so there you go, undefeated in the regular season. Now in the playoffs, they played Resurrection Christian, who they just absolutely hammered 58-0 before playing Palisade, who they beat 31-6, and then going to the semis here, or at least I think this was the semis against Roosevelt, where they unfortunately lost 30-3 here, coming up just short of state after a very dominating season here. And honestly, their only close game was the Evergreen game, so one does kind of have to think, did they get a little bit too cocky against Roosevelt? Maybe, right? But it probably just kind of got away from them. Regardless, though, I think it was still a very successful season that they could be happy with, undefeated in the regular season and then just making a good run in the playoffs and just being a buzzsaw in general. They were tough, they were tough. Now, let's talk about the players that are departing here, starting with their quarterback, Zach Wallace. Obviously, in this offense, he's not going to throw a ton, but he was, efficient, throwing for 802 yards, 7 touchdowns, only 2 picks, while actually being their leader in rushing here, 745 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. He ran the system well, and he's going to be missed. This isn't exactly someone that you could replace super easily here, so that's going to be a tough one there. They also graduate Anthony DeGrazia. He was a superb athlete, rushing for 400 yards and 10 touchdowns, while contributing 389 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns as the lead receiver, while also having 27 tackles and 9 pass deflections as a member of the secondary. So there you go. Then they lose Air Force commit here. Donnie Carney, the 6'5", 225-pound player, was a force as an extra blocker on offense, and, he could catch the ball when asked. And then he actually made our top 5 seniors tight end list by just almost being a purely exceptional blocker, so you got to love that. But then on defense, he was also pretty big time too, 55 tackles, 6 tackles for loss. That is definitely somebody that they are going to be missing on their defense. And then last but not least, they also are going to be graduating Dominic Sanchez. He was the 3rd leading rusher with 361 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. And then on defense, at defensive line, he amassed 27 tackles and a team-high 6.5 sacks there. And so altogether, they are losing a number of players here. Wallace and DeGrazia will definitely be tough replaces. But on defense, they are only losing 5 of their top 13 tacklers there, which does include 3 of their top 5 leading tacklers. They're losing their 3rd, 4th, and 5th best or highest tacklers. So definitely a little tough here, but not the biggest blow that they could be taking here as they just, continue to move forward. And will be moving forward with a number of very important players here, starting with their offensive line, which I think is their most important piece of the team right now. They have 2 returning all-Playmaker offensive linemen from last year. There is no other team in the state of Colorado that have 2 returning all-Playmaker linemen, I'm pretty sure. And those 2 are seniors in tackle Colton Patterson and guard David Ives. Add on a standout incoming junior in Andreas Gilroy, who will be on our watch list as a tackle, by the way. And this Green Mountain offense is basically intact. They have a very good offensive line, some big bodies who are physical, and they're just going to pound you into the ground there. They have one of the best offensive lines in 3A, so they're going to be tough. They're basically going to run their offense the same as long as these guys control the line of scrimmage. And, just for reference, Colton Patterson, 6'4", 280. David Ives, a little bit shorter, 6'3", 225, smaller, I should say. Andres Gilroy, just as a junior here. This might be updated later, but he's 6'3", 235. And then they also have another lineman, and John Neurath here, who's 6'4", 235. So definitely some solid size here, and they might even be bigger than what they're listed. So there you go. This line should power this team into another contending role here. They also bring back Blake Westland. The incoming junior linebacker led the team with 90 tackles and 5 tackles for loss. He will be leading a defense that will not be losing too many pieces. So there you go there. They also return linebacker Austin Contreras. The incoming senior is now 6'2", 230 pounds, but he was the second leading tackler with 72 tackles and a whopping 17.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. He is very fast for his size here, and he's definitely somebody in consideration for depoys, all Playmaker, potentially our top 5 senior list, which I think would be huge. But he's going to be a tough player to look out there, returning for Green Mountain. In addition, let's talk a little bit about some players on offense here, starting with Max Shobian, I want to say. I think it's Shobian. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, though. He will be an incoming senior. He had 259 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. So look for him to potentially step up and be the lead back behind a tough offensive line. They also returned George Sape, the 6'1", 185-pound incoming senior athlete, was a big part of this defense, I believe, here. He had a solid, let me bring up his stats here. He had 42 tackles and 6 tackles for loss, but I think he's another guy that could potentially get carries on offense there. Another bruising back potentially. So Green Mountain, they are losing some guys, but they returned their line, which I think is really important, obviously, in a run-first offense. And then they return some key parts of this defense here. I'm looking at Blake Westland and Contreras to really turn up. And then obviously you have a lot of those guys on your offensive line playing on the defensive line as well, which I think they should be able to control here. Now let's go ahead and talk about this season. To start, they play 4A Golden. They are losing Giselle Riley here, and I think this is an upset waiting to happen. I think they win this game. Green Mountain, they're going to be a tough squad, and they're going to play physical. I don't know if Golden has the firepower to beat them quite yet here. Maybe if they play them later in the season, but they're game 1. So I think that's a dub for Green Mountain, and that would be a big one going towards their RPI. Then they play Severance here. I think that's another win. This will probably be a little bit of a closer game, but honestly, per usual, if Green Mountain keeps it simple, plays good enough defense, they should definitely come away with it, and I think they're more than capable of that. Then they play Mountain View, Pueblo South. Both of those should be wins there. Meade, that will probably be a closer game, but still a win. I like Green Mountain and what they're bringing back there. Evergreen, they're losing everyone. That should be a win. Conifer, maybe a little bit of a challenge here, but I think that definitely should be a win. Wheat Ridge should be a win. Littleton should be a win. Skyview should be a win. And so I have Green Mountain going undefeated once more. 10-0 here, so that means they would be on a 20-game win streak in the regular season if that happens, but I do give them a window of wins between 7 and 10. Look, this team's extremely hard to beat, and I think this defense will be one of the best in 3A with all the size they return, plus their very exceptional linebackers. And then on offense, they returned the line that bulldozed plenty of defenses last year. And will be an absolute force and probably one of the best, if not the best, in all of 3A here. And so that's tough to stop, especially when they just run the football. So, you got to imagine this offense is not going to lose too much of a beat. Now, they're going to have to figure out who will bring the production on offense. But honestly, how hard could it be to run behind this dominant and offensive line? So there you go there. Now, the 3 games that I think are a little bit, let's say 4 games that are a little bit questionable here, might be losable, is Severance, all right, Golden, because they're a 4A team. Maybe, they catch Green Mountain off guard here. Meade, as well. They should get better. This is a program that hasn't been, I don't think they've had really bad back-to-back seasons or losing seasons in a while. So there you go there. Or even 500 seasons. And then I think Conifer might be a challenge here. Might be. But other than that, I think Green Mountain bulldozes through, continues to play their tough style of football, and maybe this is their year. Don't get it twisted. They're definitely in the contenders spot here, contenders position here, and could win state. We'll just have to see. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about Littleton here. Last year, I thought they'd go 7-3 with the window of wins between 6 and 8, but instead they finished 5-5 here. Had some tough injuries, especially at the end there, and they were 1 win short of my window of wins, so they were just outside here. Not completely out of the ballpark, but definitely in the neighborhood. So let's talk about how this season went. To start, they would go ahead and they would beat Sierra 12-8. That was a hard-fought game where they didn't have Bryce Malonga, so that's a good one there. They would go ahead and defeat Arvada 28-18. So there you go. They would beat Alameda 74-0, which is wild. But as expected, they would go beat Englewood here 44-33, which was huge. Then they'd lose to Kennedy. This was a game that I thought they could win, and they didn't. They lost to them 48-8, which was crazy. But, those games happen. But then they bounced back and beat Skyview 48-26 there before losing to Evergreen. As expected, 56-0. They lost to Conifer 65-22, which is definitely tough there. And then Green Mountain as well. They lost 65-0. Before losing to Wheat Ridge here 14-6. I thought that was a winnable game, but I think maybe injuries got the best of them at this point. Other than that, still solid. A solid year for Littleton at 5-5. It's been a while, I feel like, since they've done this well. But let's talk about the seniors they are losing, as they were a pretty senior-heavy group and had some really good talent there, starting with their star running back, Bryson Malonga. He only played 7 games, mind you, but went off for 1,191 yards and 16 touchdowns, which is absolutely crazy in the limited time he had. He was also an all-point candidate and probably would have been all-PMC if he didn't fall below our games limit there. But unfortunately, he did. And so that's going to be a tough running back to replace. They also lose their quarterback, Tim Higgins. He had a solid year, throwing for 1,408 yards, 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. So it wasn't the most efficient, but still productive enough to give them somebody outside of Malonga to rely on there. But the guy he was throwing to was a solid receiver in Aiden Lauer. He got 38 receptions for 759 yards and 8 touchdowns as the wideout one. Also tallied 29 tackles and 2 picks on defense. This is another great athlete that would definitely be missed. And then last but not least, or I guess second to last here, is Ethan Bird. Like Malonga, he suffered an injury kind of near the end there that put him out a couple games, but this 6'3", 200-pound player also played receiver and had 240 yards and a touchdown there on 24 receptions. And then on defense, he had 35 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and led the team with 8 sacks there. And they also lose a tackle here, one of their linemen, in Brady Jenkins, so that's going to be tough. Altogether, the damage on defense, though, losing 6 of their top 13 tacklers. That does include 3 of their top 5 tackle leaders, though. So definitely some leadership to replace, as well as on offense. I mean, you're kind of losing a little bit of your big 3 here in Higgins, Malonga, and Lauer there. As well as some other guys. Ethan Bird was definitely in that mix. Connor Weary, I want to say, was another guy. He was the second leading rusher with 292 yards on 3 touchdowns. That was definitely in that mix. So you're losing some significant talent. But, going into this next season. Oh, and I should probably say this as well. Sorry. They also lose their head coach. He is leaving, but they bring back a pretty good head coach here. And Lance Vieira. He last coached at George Washington for those 2 years, 2020, 2022. That's when they really turned around this program, and he brings a lot of other coaches with him, including a boy. We got to shout him out, Spencer Sullivan, assistant D-line and linebacker coach. Shout out Box State Sports. Make sure you go ahead and follow them, but they do return. Maybe they're not bringing back the same coaching staff as they did last year, but they do return a good one, I think, this year. So there you go there. But they got to have a couple players to work around, right, to start building with. It's not going to be pretty right away. And so here are some of the key players you can look at here. let's go ahead and start with our guy, Chase Pruitt. He will be an incoming sophomore. He was Bryson's backup at running back, and you got to think he'll probably be the main guy going forward into this next year. He also played linebacker as well, so look for him to turn up, and I believe we will be dropping an interview with him soon, so stay tuned for that as well. But Chase Pruitt, I think, will be a very special sophomore, definitely someone they could work with going into this next year. Then there is Colton Gerber, the 5'9", 200-pound defensive tackle. He was very productive, though. He had 91 tackles and 2 sacks, and was their lead tackler on defense. He will be coming back for his senior year, so at least you have him. They also bring back Armando Jimenez, the linebacker slash safety, will be a senior as well. And like I said, second leading tackler with 47. And so that's a much needed experience you bring back between those two. In addition, they also bring back Nashawn Harrison. He's an incoming senior. He's 6'4", 220 pounds, had 27 tackles, and was the second sack leader here with 5. His return will be huge for Littleton. He could have a breakout season potentially as well. Just keep an eye out. And then last but not least, they also bring back Ryan Braun here, the 6'4", 280-pound center slash defensive tackle here. He's tough. You know, he had 22 tackles on defense, and so he'll be a big force for them up front, but I think he's a really good center for them as well. I like his game, you know, I really like his game, and so you got some pieces to work with here. You know, I mostly listed a lot of seniors here, but you got to build a foundation, right? And they also have, you know, Youngin and Chase Pruitt, who did get varsity snaps last year. He was on varsity all of last year, and so you kind of hope for him to take a step forward with these seniors as well and with this new coaching staff. And I'm sure there are more players that we could talk about, but like I said, I just wanted to mention some of the key ones there, starting with our seniors and then, you know, some of our guys over there as well. But Littleton will definitely be looking to, you know, do what they can and have a little bit of a learning slash rebuilding year as they go into this new season. But to start, they play Sierra. That won't be an easy game. Plus, it's away as well here. Michael Lumpkin, their star receiver, one of the best in Colorado probably, and company will have a good offense, if any, and they should return a pretty solid defense as well. They're not losing that many players at all. And, you know, they kind of struggled to beat them last year. I think just with so much going on with the new coaching staff, with new players having to come in and fill important roles like quarterback, running back, receiver, even with some of the experience they have, I think that's just a little bit too much to be asking out of Littleton to win this one. I think it will be close, and if they could steal it, that'll be huge. But for now, I'm going to say that is a loss. Then they play Arvada. Arvada's returning a lot here, and they'll actually be pretty good. Trevor Lucero, he is probably going to be one of the best quarterbacks in, I think Arvada's 2A, I want to say. Here, let me check real quick. Yup, 2A. He's in 2A. And then he has a pretty good group around him as well. They might make some noise, actually, in 2A. I know that's Cody's team, so make sure you check out that season preview. But they're not going to be easy to beat at all, so I think that is a loss. Their quarterback will be really good. But then they play Alameda. That really should be a dub. We'll talk about Alameda later here, but that should be a good confidence-boosting dub. But following that, though, they play Englewood. Another 2A team, but they're one of the better ones as well. They bring back a very experienced quarterback, or, you know, relatively experienced quarterback in Carson Campbell going into his junior year, and he had flashes of greatness. I think if he really cleans it up, he could turn up this next season, and I think that's going to be a lot for for Littleton to handle. Plus Englewood, they have a pretty solid defense. Jace Pronte will be coming back, so that Pronte versus Braun matchup will be key to this game. But for now, I gotta go with experience. I think that is unfortunately a loss there. Then they play Skyview. I think that's definitely a dub. That should be another one they get there. Following that, they play Evergreen. I think this is winnable here, but it is kind of in that second half of the season. By this point, Evergreen, you know, they're kind of going, right? They have a couple more established players. Yeah, so I'm not sure how this game's going to look in general. Both teams are just losing a lot here, so I don't have the greatest idea of how this one will go. But I'm going to go with the more historically consistent program in Evergreen here. But don't get it twisted. This could definitely be a win, though. If they could sneak it, it could definitely be a win, as Littleton does return a bit more. We just got to see what this coaching staff does with the guys they have. So we'll see what happens. Following that, they play Conifer. I think that's a loss. Conifer should be a really good playoff team. Forsyth, he's a force. White Nichols should take a step forward. And then their defense is probably the most experienced, if not one of the more experienced defenses in 3A. That's a tough one. Plus, it's away too at Conifer. So there you go there. Then they play Green Mountain. I just talked about Green Mountain. I think they're a contender. They're going to be really tough to beat. I don't think they're quite there yet. That's a loss. Following that, they play Wheat Ridge here. This is a very winnable game at the season here, at the end of the season here. And even then, last year, I don't know why they lost it, but they did. Wheat Ridge, they do lose their quarterback, so that goes a long way here. I think this Littleton defense could take advantage of that and beat them here. So altogether, I have Littleton going 3-6 with a window of wins between 2 and 5 here. They might be able to get to 500. I could definitely see a world where they do that. I would love for them to do that, but it's going to be an uphill battle, though. I think for sure here, I don't want to say for sure. That sounds really disrespectful, but 85 to 95% sure that they could be an Alameda, Skyview, or Wheat Ridge right now. But after that, they are looking at potential upsets, I think Arvada, let me start with an easier team. I think Sierra could definitely be one. Defensively, if you could lock up Michael Lumpkin, then I think that is definitely a game you could win. But even when he's locked up, he's tough to cover. So there's that as well. I don't know. I mean, offensively, they got to pull their weight there. So we'll just have to see what happens. Maybe Arvada could be a winnable game. They are a 2A squad here, but if you could force them into some turnovers, you could definitely win that game, I would say. I think you could definitely win that game if you could force some turnovers, but Lucero and company should be better, and so that does make me a little concerned as well. So I think Sierra and Arvada are both games that could get them to 500, but we'll just have to see. Other than that, I'm really excited for this Littleton coaching staff. They're not going to win state or go playoffs or do anything crazy like that their first year, but I think you got to build that foundation and you just got to work towards getting better every single day. And they got some pieces over there for sure. And we have seen, some really nice clips and whatnot. And so we'll just have to see what happens. And then before I, go ahead and move on here, make sure you check out Chase Pruitt's interview, which should be dropping pretty much the next day after this episode. So there you go. All right, up next, we got Lewis Palmer here. I predicted them going 2-8 with a record of 1-3. I am going to say this, their stats was really incomplete, so it was hard to get a vibe for them, right? But this year, they did a little bit of a better job, so shout out to them. And they also exceeded my expectations, going 5-5 here, which, like I said, I honestly couldn't have foreseen because of, the lack of film and stats and all that stuff. But they went 5-5, and so let's go ahead and go game by game here, talk about this schedule. To start, they lost to Discovery Canyon 29-21. That's kind of tough in hindsight, obviously. Well, even right now, or back then, that was definitely a winnable game here. I did say they would lose to them, but Discovery Canyon is a little bit more experienced, is what I'm trying to say. So there you go. Then they played Coronado. I thought that would be a loss there, as I thought Coronado was just bigger. But Lewis Palmer, with a big win over a 4A team, 43-19. Gotta love that. Then they played Palmer Ridge. That was a loss, 58-17. That's as expected. I thought they would lose to Canyon City, but they blasted them 41-8. Then they played Falcon here, which was interesting. They still lost, 20-14. But it was a lot closer, and that definitely could have been a win there. So you got to feel good about that moving forward. Then the same against Harrison here. This was another loss. They lost by 1 score or 6 points again, 19-13. At this point, you probably got to feel sick to your stomach, because if you are Lewis Palmer, winning versus Falcon and Harrison, and then, the rest of the schedule going as predicted, that would have put them in the playoffs, I think. So there you go. But it happened. Then they would bounce back, beat Pueblo South 35-20 in a relatively close one, but I think they had control of that the whole time. Pueblo Central, they lost 39-8 as predicted. And by the way, the South game I was wrong about, so there you go. Then they played Sierra. That was a dub, 46-14. then played Pueblo Centennial 40-6 there, which I thought would be a dub. So altogether, I mean, you got to feel good about this year as Lewis Palmer. They took a step forward, right? They took a step forward. That's all you could hope for. You know, you got to continue to build on that as you get better and whatnot. And I think they will be this season. But first, before we talk about this season, let's talk about the players that they graduate here. Starting with, and by the way, I'm going to throw this out there. They did a relatively good job with stats, but they didn't record tackles or sacks for some reason. They recorded interceptions, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Anyways, offensively, though, they recorded those. Let's start with probably one of their biggest losses here, and that is Luke DeLange here. He was their lead receiver, 6'3", 200 pounds, by the way, and he came up big as the wideout one, catching 21 receptions for 490 yards and 5 touchdowns. I could only assume he was part of this defense as well, so that's definitely a tough loss. They also graduate Tristan, is it Ogenis or Ohenis? I could be wrong. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm butchering it. But he was a solid athlete on offense, rushed for 148 yards, 3 touchdowns, caught for 11 receptions and 117 yards and a touchdown. And then it looks like they are losing one lineman here in Jefferson McCamley. And so those are their graduates. I don't think they're graduating any more important players, though. Or not too many more important players, as they do bring back the core, at least on offense. So let's go ahead and talk about that core here. And like I said, don't have the defensive stats, so this will be a very offensive-centric season preview / episode, I guess. But the key player they're bringing back is Kenton Kenley. He is an incoming senior quarterback, 6 foot, 185 pounds, took a step forward and helped this team get better. Threw for 842 yards, 9 touchdowns to 8 picks, though, but also it's a running offense, so, it is what it is. He also contributed 284 yards and 8 touchdowns. Losing DeLange is tough. He is also losing his wideout, too. So if he could continue to clean up his game, then he could definitely lead this team to more wins. Because you got to think, with that many turnovers and the number of close games they had, maybe if you were a turnover short, it's a little bit more winnable. But, coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? So there you go there, but they bring him back. I think that's going to be huge for them. They also bring back Jaden Pagano. He's an incoming junior and was the lead rusher with 677 yards and 7 touchdowns. He will be vital to the success of Lewis Palmer moving forward. So look to him to be one of the workhorses for this squad, along with Ken Lee, I would say. They also bring back Will Patton. He is another incoming senior. He was right behind Pagano with 653 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. Those two, along with Kenley, will be, key to the success for Lewis Palmer. And then there's one more player I do want to mention here, Luke DeBoer. He will be an incoming senior. I think he has some serious speed. Look out for him to get used a little bit more here on this run-first offense. So there you go. Lewis Palmer, they're a tough team. They're going to run the ball. They're going to control the clock. They did a good job of that last year. Defensively, I don't think they're losing that many players. If anything, it's like a half and half split. And so there are a couple holes, but it could definitely be worse, though. With that being said, let's go ahead and predict their schedule here. To start, they play Discovery Canyon here. I think that's a dub. Discovery Canyon, they lose a lot, and I think that should mean the difference between a win or a loss, because this was a close loss for Lewis Palmer last year. So there you go, win automatically. Then they play Coronado. I think that's another win. They will have Reality and Jackson Katowski coming back, but I think that is really a game where they should be able to take control and, limit the amount of touches their offense gets. So that'll be big. Then they play Palmer Ridge. That's a loss. I don't really see that changing anytime soon, so that should be a loss. Then Canyon City, I think that's a win there. Following that, they play Falcon. I think this will be a really close game, and it's definitely a winnable one. If, the cards go their way, maybe they force a turnover and are able to score off of that, and they just hold on to the lead for the rest of the game. Or something, I don't know, maybe something happens, but this will be a very heavy smash-mouth football game from both sides here. I'm going to go with Falcon, but I do acknowledge that this could definitely be a win for LP. Following that, they play Pueblo South. I think they should be able to beat Pueblo South here. I'm not really confident in their identity on offense. Not like Lewis Palmer's at least, so that should be a dub for LP. Then they play Pueblo Central. I think this is a playoff team in Central, a really good playoff team in Central, and they just got a little bit too many weapons here. Unfortunately, I think that's a loss. Following that, they play Sierra. They're very similar to Coronado. Gotta control the pace of this game, and I think they will, so that should be a dub. Centennial should be another win there. Pueblo Centennial, that is. And then Harrison, they're not scheduled yet, but they are a league game. I think, I don't know, maybe that's a close game, but they do lose TJ Washington. I'm going to give it to Harrison. I think it's a loss, but it's a close one. This will probably be key to them making the playoffs, though. So altogether, I have them going 6-4 with the window of wins between 5 and 8. This should be a good season for Lewis Palmer. They should really hit 500 at least based on the success they found on offense last year. But I am concerned about them losing DeLange, and I think their backs, they can handle the pace of the game, but you obviously want another dimension to your offense there. Plus another guy you could play on defense too. So we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. They lost a lot of close games last season. Hopefully this season, you finish those games and those losses turn into wins and potentially they make the playoffs. I think they are very capable of doing that here on this level. So we'll just have to see what happens. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about Lutheran next here. Last year, I predicted them to go 9-1 with a window of wins between 7 and 10. In the regular season, they went 8-2, so just one game short of the predicted record, but definitely still within the window of wins here. Let's go ahead and hop into this one and talk about it, because I think I pretty much got every single game correctly here for the regular season, last season in 2022 here. But to start, they played Lutheran, another team named Lutheran from Missouri, and they lost to them at home. That was a game that I thought they would win, but they lost 26-16. It happens. That was the only one I got wrong, though. Following that, they played Meade, beat them 19-7. That was big there. Then would go ahead and destroy Discovery Canyon 50-0. They went on and played Pueblo East. I went to this game. This was not close at all. They beat them 56-27. Amassed a really big lead at halftime, so I wasn't even there for the entire part. But they really showed their firepower in that game and their special teams prowess as well. Then the following week, they went ahead and played Montrose. I did say that this would be a loss here, as they are one of the top teams in 4A. And they did lose to them 42-26. Still relatively close. It could have been worse. There are a lot of other teams that have finished with a bigger margin, losing to a team like Montrose. So, I think you live with that if you're Lutheran. But following that, they went on a nice little run here. Beat Holy Family 35-13 in a key league game. Beat Lincoln 61-0. Took down Northfield 57-7. Beat Kennedy 55-14. Beat Fort Morgan away at Fort Morgan 37-0 to go ahead and close the regular season there. Then in the playoffs, that's where things got interesting. Went ahead, played Pueblo East in the first round again and beat them 49-6. Then I think in this next game, they were without their starting quarterback against Frederick, but they still beat them 21-6. And then against Durango, it looked like they got their quarterback back for that one, and it was in Durango, so this was probably one of the tougher trips to make for any team in 3A. But they still would come out on top, beating them 45-28, buying themselves a ticket to the state championship. I want to say that might have been their first appearance ever. I could have been wrong, though. But that's where they would play Roosevelt. In that game, it was very close. They did get an early 2-score lead to start and forced a lot of turnovers on Roosevelt. It looked like for a minute there that they were going to run away with it. But then Roosevelt would scrap back here. And in the second half of that game, Lutheran just kind of struggled getting some things going. They did, switch it up, put Chase Sorensen at quarterback, ran a little bit more option. That would get them a score, I believe. But, Roosevelt, they would just go on a nice run here on offense, and defensively were tough to close it out. So, unfortunately, Lutheran came close to their first state championship, but lost just short here to a very tough Roosevelt team who has been here before in their defense. So, there you go. Altogether, if you're Lutheran, I did say they would be a contender this year. I could see them going to state. Unfortunately, they just couldn't quite get it done at state, and so this will definitely be a learning experience moving forward for this Lutheran squad here. But before we move forward and talk about this 2023 season, let's talk about some of the players that will be departing them here due to graduation, starting with Ryan Kenny. He was a top 5 senior running back for us and an all Playmaker running back for the 3A level for us as well. He honestly exceeded expectations, rushing for 1,516 yards and 23 touchdowns while leading the team in tackles with 131, 22 tackles for loss and a team-high 9 sacks. He was also an MVP candidate for us as well, and there was a good reason for that. He moves on to go on and play on the next level, and so wishing him all the best of luck there, but he was a key athlete for this squad. That's going to be a tough gap to replace there. Speaking of key athletes, though, Chase Sorensen is another guy they miss, who was kind of their do-it-all guy who really helped them out down the stretch here, especially in the playoffs. He threw for 572 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Like I said, in the state championship game, he did get subbed in, and then in the Frederick game, he was the starting quarterback in the spot of their starter who got hurt the week before. And he ended up being big, like I said, in their playoff run, keeping them alive. He also rushed for 464 yards and 4 touchdowns while catching 355 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns on 29 receptions. And so he was kind of just their do-it-all athlete, who really just contributed whenever needed. And so that's definitely going to be tough, going into this next season here without him, a guy that they leaned on heavily at times throughout the season and, saved their season too at times. So I'm just going to throw all that out there. In addition, they also graduate Trey Cicio. The incoming senior had 24 receptions, 393 yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns, but he was very impactful, mostly on defense, I would say, where he tallied 60 tackles, 13 tackles for loss and 6 interceptions. He's a great athlete that they'll be losing on both sides of the ball there. And then last but definitely not least here, at least individually, they're also graduating Josh Ayers. The linebacker had 119 tackles, 31 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, 19 hurries. He was just outside of consideration for all Playmaker and Depoy for us, but he was extremely important to this team's success regardless. And then last but not least, they are losing guys like Jaden Williams, Sam Weisler, Braden Mitchell being a lineman, Weisler and Williams being both skill players there. That's going to be a tough replace. Altogether, looking at the damage here, outside of the guys they're losing on offense, on defense, they're losing 7 of their top 13 tacklers. That does include 2 of their leading tacklers here in Ryan Kenny and Josh Ayers. So they got some leadership to replace on defense. And then on offense, like I said, you lose a guy like Sorensen and Kenny, who are big to your rushing game. That is definitely going to impact this squad moving forward. Also, as well as Weisler and Cicio. Those are tough losses. But Lutheran, they're going to reload here, and they're going to build around the guys they have, starting with their incoming senior quarterback, Ryken Doggard. As expected in his first season, he threw for 2,585 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 9 picks, leading his team to state. Going into senior year, he will be due for a big season. Last season, though, he did make our All-Playmaker and was an Offensive Playmaker of the Year candidate there. And so he should be due for similar honors while also being somebody we seriously consider for a top 5 senior quarterback here in his class. And with the loss of so many players, the pressure is definitely on here, but he has shown to be able to run this offense efficiently. If he could potentially even take a step forward, I think that definitely makes them into a contender and into a potential state championship as well. Now, he will have some help as they do return his lead receiver in Joe CCO. He had a breakout year, catching 71 receptions for 1,240 yards and 15 receiving touchdowns. He is a special player who can also be another Opoi guy going into this year. With the receivers behind him leaving, he becomes that much more vital. Also, by the way, he returns 26 tackles on defense. Wouldn't be surprised if he takes on a bigger role there, but definitely on offense, he will be the wideout one. And he's a tough dude to guard. He's definitely a tough dude to guard, so a lot of attention will be paid to him, so that should leave opportunities for other players to step up here and turn up. So we're just going to have to see what happens there. In addition, let's go ahead and go to the defensive side, or sorry, let's stay on the offensive side. I almost forgot. I want to talk about their offensive line, and then we'll talk about their defense here. On the offensive line here, they bring back Keaton Raymond, Colin Sturm, Caleb Abramson. Those are the three main guys that I wanted to talk about. They will be returning plenty of starters from this offensive line, and they will have one of the best in 3A as well. That's some really good continuity to be returning for Lutheran there. 3 of your 5 offensive linemen. One more could you ask for? Also, I'm just going to say this. Look out for junior Alex Zachem. He's a 6'8", 265-pound lineman. You know, maybe he gets some playing time this year as well. There are plenty of dudes, you know, on this line for Lutheran who will be issues for opposing defenses. And I think this group of linemen will help lead the way and smooth some things over. Whoever kind of walks in to this running back spot here will have a good line to, you know, run behind, and it helps that you're already in a system that, you know, spreads out the ball and takes players out of the box. So there you go. I think the next running back up is probably Sawyer Wald. He was the 3rd leading rusher with 332 rushing yards. No touchdowns though, so potentially look for him to get into that mix there. But yeah, this offense, I mean, they are losing some guys, but returning your line is huge, as well as your quarterback and star receiver. You could definitely work with that. There's worse cores to work with. Now, let's talk about the defense here. I think the defense, you know, they are losing the majority of their top tacklers from last year, but they got some good ones here, starting with Landon Roshek, I want to say. Hopefully I'm saying that right. If I'm not, I'm sorry, but he will be an incoming senior defensive tackle. A little undersized at 5'10", 250, but he was extremely productive and will be one of their most productive returners on defense. He actually had 81 tackles, 26 tackles for loss, and a whopping 6.5 sacks. This is a promising defensive player to bring back. Like I said, undersized, but pretty technically sound. Really liked watching his film there, and so moving forward, that's going to be big for Lutheran to have him up front. But in general, I mean, this front 7, specifically this defensive line, will be tough. They also return Ryken Posey, the incoming senior. He's 6'3", 250 pounds there at defensive end / tackle. Offensive tackle, that is. But I think he plays a lot of defensive end here. He had 61 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, and 5.5 sacks, so he'll be returning there. In addition to Peyton Garrett, another incoming senior around 6'2", 225 pounds at defensive end. He had 52 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, and 4.5 sacks. Those 3 guys on the defensive line will be issues for a lot of offenses out there that, first off, might not have the size to combat all of that, and then second off, might not even have the skill to do that either. So having that is going to be huge. You could definitely work with that moving forward. You know, dominating the trenches, that's how you win football games. That's how you win championships, especially on defense. So there you go. That's very promising there. And then last but not least, they also returned Samuel Smolin. I believe he's their kicker or punter as well. But, you know, he also played safety, I want to say, for this squad. And he was pretty good last year. He had 60 tackles, co-led in interceptions with 6 of those, and he will be a key part returning for the secondary. So, you know, on defense, you are losing some guys, but at least you bring back basically your defensive line. I don't even want to say majority. You bring, I want to say, your entire defensive line back for the most part. And then you have a really good safety in Smolin that you have bringing back here that should turn up in the backfield, or I guess back end of the defense. But either way, you know, you could work with that. I think this is a defense that can win them a state championship if it comes down to it. Now, will it be the strength of their team? I think it's going to be their offense, per usual, being the strength of their team. But at least you got a defense that could play, and be all right back there. So there you go, Lutheran. They are graduating some key players, but they bring back a good core where they're going to reload and move forward from there. So let's go ahead and start and look at their schedule here. To start off, they actually go to Missouri here to play that team in Lutheran. I'm always going to pick them to win it as in our Lutheran, and so I'm going to do that again here. This team, I think, is a little bit more experienced. This should be a win. Following that, they play Meade. Meade will be better, so I don't think it will be... I don't think it'll be anything crazier than a 2 or 3 score game. I think this might be closer, but I'm going to give them the win here at home. Discovery Canyon, that should be a win. Pueblo East should be a win, especially since they don't have their quarterback over there anymore. They play Montrose here. I think that's a loss here. Montrose is a tough team in 4A. I talked about them, I think, on a season preview episode just before this, and I had them going undefeated in 4A. So there's that. If they do beat them, that will be huge. I don't know how much that'll matter, though. Not as much as League, obviously, because in League, they go ahead and play Holy Family on the road. I think this will be a tough game as they will be better, but I'm going to go ahead and favor Lutheran in this one here. So that's going to be a key game for sure. Probably for League, honestly. And so if they win that one, I think they're in a good spot, because then they play Lincoln, Northfield, Kennedy, Fort Morgan. Those are all teams I think they could beat here. Northfield and Fort Morgan, maybe potential trap games. They definitely got some talent over there that is worth, keeping an eye on and, taking seriously still. But if all goes according to plan, I think they go 9-1 with a window of wins anywhere between 7 and 10 here. This should be another contending year for Lutheran here. I think their championship window is definitely still open. Their offensive and defensive lines, extremely talented. I think when it comes down to who has the most complete offensive and defensive lines in 3A, I think you could go ahead and look at Lutheran and be like, that's that team. They're they have one of the biggest offensive lines and one of the most talented ones on both sides of the ball. And it's not just dudes playing both ways. Like I would say a Green Mountain, like you got guys that are just playing offensive line mostly, that are mostly primarily playing defensive line. And I think that matters, when platooning and thinking about, all right, well, who do we got to replace if somebody gets hurt here, fatigue, all that stuff. And so that's going to go a long way. On top of that, add that they bring back a quarterback. They bring back probably one of the best wide receivers in Colorado, period, and CCO over there. And, as well as a great coaching staff. I think this could definitely be their year. Now, they got to fill in some players, specifically, I would say, on offense. Hopefully, some more skill players could, step up here outside of CCO. And, Doggard as well. You probably need a running back to turn up as well. Just a guy to take off the pressure, rush for a cool 1,000 yards. Behind this line, they should be able to. And if they're not, then maybe there might be some issues there at running back. But they should be able to replace that, and hopefully, you get maybe 2 or 3 other receivers to turn up as well. And then on defense, I guess the linebacking core, you got to replace those guys, but, with a good defensive line, that's not going to be the craziest thing. Maybe the secondary is a little bit of an issue here, but I'm not as worried. Either way, this should be another banner year for Lutheran as they continue to chase that all-elusive state championship. We'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Okay, now moving down to the 2A level, we're talking about a very different program here in Alameda. Last season, I predicted them going 1-8 with a window of wins between 0 and 3. They went 0-8, winless, but still within my window of wins, so still in that ballpark. I thought they could get a win against Lincoln here. I think that was one of the few that I predicted as a win, but instead it ended up being a close 20-14 loss, which is tough. Other than that, the rest of their season was pretty bad here. 49-6 loss to North, 74-0 loss to Littleton. You had that Lincoln loss. 40-13 loss to Devlin, 56-0 loss to TCA, 40-14 loss to Englewood, and then it looks like they forfeited their Kent, Denver, and Elizabeth games here as they just struggled here. And, you know, on top of that, they didn't take any stats at all this last season. So, yeah, that's definitely tough. You know, I don't know why they did that, but, you know, that definitely makes this season preview a lot more shorter here. So let's just get through it, I guess. But as far as graduating seniors go, I think they only have one. That is graduating, at least listed on the roster, in Claude Smith. So he's a defensive end wide receiver. He's gone. Now let's talk about key players. Like I said, no stats, no film that I could find either, so whatever. But Angel Arroyo and Tez Glover, both of these players contributed as freshmen a couple years ago. Now they will be juniors. Hopefully they're still on the squad, but, you know, without stats or, you know, a bunch of film, it's hard to say, right? So there you go there. Let's go ahead and go into their schedule for 2023, though, knowing what we know. They should return a pretty similar squad outside of Claude Smith there. So let's just go down the line here. Against Mitchell, I think they should beat them here. I'm not sure, but I think they should beat them. I mean, Mitchell, what, they're on their fifth head coach in like 5 or 6 years. Yeah. That should definitely be a win. Littleton, Lincoln. Well, let's start with Littleton. Littleton, I think, is a loss. Lincoln might be a win here. I'm going to give that to them. They are graduating their senior quarterback who kind of tore them apart, so that should be a win. Devlin, TCA, Englewood, Kent, Denver, Elizabeth, and Denver West, though, I think are all losses. So, yeah, there you go there. I got them going 2-7 with their wins between Mitchell and Lincoln being their only 2 wins, but I have them in a window of wins between 0 and 3. This is a team hitting new lows by not recording their stats, because at least they did that last time, and at this point, one can only hope a coach can come around that can turn this program around, and we'll see what happens. But currently, they don't have a coach listed on Max Prep, so yeah, we'll just see what happens for Alameda, but definitely a tough year ahead of them. Okay, moving on, we got Denver West here. I had them originally going... Let me see here. Let me make sure I have it. I have them originally going 4-5 with the window of wins between 2 and 4 here. They finished 2-7, so still within the window of wins, but definitely on the lower end. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So to start, they beat Manual 42-20. That was a big one. Then they played Lincoln and lost to them 14-10. That was a game that I thought they would for sure be able to win, but they didn't, so that's tough. But would go on and beat Flatirons Academy, who I think is a better program, 14-10. Then lose to Denver North here, 14-6 in a real close one. Lose to Kent Denver, still in a closer one, 20-6. Then they lost to TCA by 51-0. Elizabeth was a 63-20 loss. Then Englewood at the end was, or one of their games at the end was a little bit closer, 14-12. That was probably a very winnable game there. So there you go. That was a loss. Then they lost to Brush 42-6 here. It looked like they were supposed to play Alameda, but ended up taking them off here and replacing them with another team, which might have been Brush, to be honest, which is very different from Alameda. So there you go there. Kind of a tough year. They had, I want to say, 3 games that were within one score. 14-10 loss to Lincoln. 14-6 loss to North, 14-12 loss to Englewood. That's tough. That's definitely tough. Not to mention their loss to Kent Denver, which was only 20-6. This year definitely could have been a lot more different. But, you kind of work with what you got and you move forward with it. And so let's talk about some of the players they are losing. They are losing just a few here. Starting with Benjamin Chacon Jr. He was their starting offensive and defensive line for West. On defense, though, he contributed a solid 43 tackles and a whopping 15 tackles for loss. And so with him being gone, they are losing some significant size there. So that's going to be a tough replace. They are also losing another guy on their line in Saul Hernandez. He was their nose guard with 30 tackles and 10 tackles for loss. So that's 2 off their defensive line that they're losing. And then they also lose Josiah Alarcon, I want to say. He was one of their few seniors graduating with 29 tackles on the year. Altogether, it looks like most of their losses are actually going to be on defense here, where they're only losing 4 of their top 13 tacklers. So that is definitely going to be something there. Also, by the way, it looked like their quarterback from the previous year, Tyzo Osler, is gone here. But, I mean, he didn't play, so, I mean, there's that. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some key players here, starting with Ahmad Hussein, their incoming senior running back at this point. He was their best athlete, leading the team in rushing, receiving, and tackling. He amassed 895 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 151 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, and then on defense had 85 tackles and 13 tackles for loss. He could very well be an MVP candidate if he takes another step forward, and if this team wins just a couple more games here. I think that's going to be really, really important, but he should be one of the mainstays for this team. Now, his running mate is Khalil Chase here. Got some snaps in at quarterback, but he will also be a senior. At quarterback, he did throw for 293 yards, 2 touchdowns to 1 pick through 3 games, but was a pretty inefficient passer at 36% completion there. He did rush for an additional 413 yards, though, and led the team with 33 tackles and a team-high 6 interceptions. You kind of figure at the very least you got another good athlete to work with there, and so he will be a solid second option behind Hussein. In addition, they also bring back Alexander Ramos. He is a part of an experienced defense from last season where he had 37 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks, but 4.5 of them were against Manual, so, take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But those are the guys returning. They should have a solid running game, and then their defense hopefully should be better. I mean, last season they showed a lot of promise. There were a lot of games where, they held teams under 20, right? 14 points against Lincoln, 10 against Flatirons, 14 against Denver North, held Manual to 20, held Kent Denver to only 20, Englewood to 14. This defense should definitely be a bit better going into this next season, but offensively they got to pick it up. So let's go ahead and talk about next season here, though, in 2023. To start out, they are going to go ahead and play Denver North. Will be their first game here. That's a tough game here. Frankie Dardano and Espinoza will be returning, who had big games against them last year. Maybe they are able to limit them, but they do have a really good new coach who should get the most out of them. I think that's a loss, though. Then they play Manual. This team will be better, and I think offensively they're going to be tough to cover and beat there. Definitely a winnable game if you could control the pace, play good defense, but I think that's going to be a loss. Could go either way, though. Then following that, they play Lincoln. That should definitely be a win there. Flatirons Academy, that should be another win. They return a very inexperienced squad. They should be able to take advantage of that. Following that, they play Kent Denver. We will talk about them later on in this episode. I believe they're a league game. I think that's a loss. They have a really good offense coming back, and then their defense should be solid. TCA, I think, is going to be a loss. By this point in the season, they should kind of have their stuff together. They should be tough there. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's a win, though. So I'm just going to say that there. They could win that game and take advantage of a very inexperienced squad. But then they play Elizabeth and Englewood. I think those are both losses. Both of those teams will be very good here. And then following that, they play Alameda here. Alameda, I think they should be able to beat. So there you go. Altogether, I have them going 3-6, but with a window of wins between 2 and 5 here. This team does not have a lot of production here outside of Hussein and Chase here on offense, which is concerning. Because I think if they had a little bit of a better offense, then, maybe they are able to outshoot some teams. Because I know they have a pretty solid defense, or at least on paper it looks like they do. And so we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Also, if he gets hurt at any time, then that's really bad news for Wes. So I'm just going to go ahead and knock on wood there. But, we'll see what happens. I think they can go 500. They got to win the close games, though, right? And then their offense, I'd like for them to, get better, too. So we'll see what happens to West here moving forward. Okay, let's talk about Englewood here. Had them going 3-6 with the window of wins between 1 and 3, since they were losing so much. But they had a very successful season, going 6-3 here. And I was just wrong, honestly. I was just wrong. Like I said, I had them going the inverse there, 3-6. But, they showed some real grit here and, made some really good improvements for kind of a younger squad. So let's go ahead and hop into this season here from 2022. To start, they played Sheridan. That was a dub, which, I expected. Then they played Arvada. I thought that might be a loss there, but they ended up winning 19-13 in overtime. So it did go either way, Then they played Littleton, who they lost to 44-33 as expected. Did beat Lincoln, though, 29-0. Lost to Elizabeth 45-20. Beat Alameda 40-14. Then lost to TCA 48-12. I did think they would lose to Denver West here. I said this was a close game, but I also said it would be a winnable game, which they did win 14-12 in a very close game. And then at the end here, I said they would lose to Kent Denver, but I said both programs would be in similar spots where they're kind of rebuilding here. And, they did end up beating them 14-6. So a couple really close games here that I was just barely wrong about. Arvada and Kent Denver and Denver West were the ones I was wrong about. And all of those were one-score games here. So, hey, it is what it is. That's why we give them a window of wins here. And, they did a very good job exceeding those expectations. Now let's go ahead and talk about some graduating seniors here. Starting on offense, Isaiah Segoviano, I want to say. He was their lead rusher with 644 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. So he was a big part of that offense. And then on defense, had 38 tackles and 2 picks. He helped carry the offense last year and brought some stability there, which was huge, along with his running mate, Benedict Sturr. He was another breakout player who was the second leading rusher with 403 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. Also tagged on 63 tackles, 11 tackles for loss as a second leading tackler, and is another productive player that will be missed there. On top of that, they lose their lead receiver from last year, Logan Owens. He had 360 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns on 20 receptions. So that's definitely a tough one they're losing. And then kind of switching over to the defensive side of the ball here, they lose their lead tackler in Chase Apodaca here, who had 75 tackles and a whopping 20 tackles for loss, while leading the team in sacks with 5. And so altogether, looking at the damage on defense at least, they're losing 6 of their top 13 tacklers, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 3 of their top 5 tackle leaders from last year, so that's definitely going to be tough. And then from the looks of it, they will be graduating 1 senior lineman in Diego Villarreal, but returning the majority of their offensive line here. So for the most part, the Englewood team will be intact moving forward. Let's talk about some of the key players here. To start here, I want to talk about this offensive line, as they will have one of the bigger ones in 2A. I think maybe the biggest one in 2A here. But they return Joe McMahons. He's 6'2", 270 pounds, will be an incoming junior. Johnny Peterson, 5'10", 215. He's a senior. Cameron Mead, 5'10", 215, just a junior. Logan Weber, 6'2", 260. He will be a junior. Zach Wilhite, 5'11", 220. He will be a junior. And so just on paper, this is one of the bigger offensive lines in 2A, and so really whatever running back you stick behind there should have some solid gaps and whatnot to work with, plus their quarterback will be protected for the most part here. Now, before we talk about the quarterback, I do want to talk about one player on this defense that I think will be very key moving forward here, as they do return half of their defense, which is not the worst thing. But that player is Jace Pronte, the 6', 220-pound senior receiver / defensive lineman. On the line, though, he had 53 tackles and 12 tackles for loss. He has the highest tackles from any returning defensive player, and he should be big time for this defense. He's another guy who, is just very skilled and very technically sound here. And so kind of building around a good defensive tackle is never a bad thing on defense there. You could definitely live with that and work with that. Now, on offense, I think one of the most important players they return outside of their line definitely has to be quarterback Carson Campbell. The incoming junior, he's 6'4", 170 pounds, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in 2A, or at least I think he will be. As a sophomore, threw for 1,209 yards, 11 touchdowns to 11 picks, but going into his junior year, he should be taking a step forward as he also returns his two receivers here in Gonzalez and Dever. Those were his number 2 and number 3 wide receivers there. And so there's some talent returning in the receiving corps at least. But most importantly, Campbell here showed a lot of flashes last year. I think looking through his film and also watching him in the offseason as well here, he showed that he can throw the ball really well. He has good arm talent for the most part, but I think it's going to come down to decision making. There are some tight windows that he threw that I was like, maybe, I don't know if I would throw that one. Maybe, an easier opportunity, obviously, but, if it's third and long, obviously you have to make those throws, right? But in addition, I think there's some more gimme throws down low that he can make. And so if he could continue to develop, be a more mature quarterback and whatnot, I think that would really go a long way for Campbell and for Englewood in the long run here, because I do think Englewood could make a nice little run here. It just depends on their quarterback, and it also depends on some of the other receivers and surrounding cast around him. But, if he's a good enough quarterback, then he uplifts them, right? Elevates the talent. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about this 2023 season here. To start, they play Sheridan. That should be a dub. That'll be a good one. Then they play Arvada. This is or should I say will be a hard-fought game on the road here, which might come down to the last minutes. Honestly, they return a good group there led by their quarterback Trevor Lucero here. But if Campbell takes a step forward, then I think this is definitely winnable, especially with the offensive line they have. So there you go there. Then they play Littleton. They don't have Bryson Malonga, who had an insane game against them. And they also lose a couple other players as well. And Littleton, they're going to be, they'll be losing a solid amount here. So getting them early on in the season should bode well for them. I think that's a win for Englewood. Following that, they go ahead and play Lincoln. That is a dub. Then they play Elizabeth. That's a closer game. Definitely a winnable game, but I think that is a loss here. They're going to be tough running the ball, playing good defense. And so Englewood's defense has to step up here. And at the very least, Campbell, I would say, would probably need to have a pretty solid game here, if not a signature game, to win this one, because this is a very good Elizabeth squad. Then they go ahead and play Alameda. That's a dub there. That's a win. TCA really should be a win if they air it out against this team. I think they're also bigger than them up front this time around. So there you go there. It could still be a trap game, though. Then they play Denver West. That really should be a win there. Following that, they play Kent Denver. I think that's a loss here. I'm going to talk about Kent Denver right after this here. But I think that's a loss. It's going to be a good one. I think it's going to be one that could go either way. But I like Kent Denver at home here. I like what they're bringing back, which, like I said, I'll talk about here on this next segment. Definitely could go the other way, but it really just depends on how well Campbell and this offense does. Altogether, though, I have Englewood going 8-2 with a window of wins between 6 and 9. I really think this team can be a playoff team, but it will come down to their league games. If they can win all their non-league games, that will put them in a good spot. And then most likely they will just need to beat Elizabeth, Kent Denver, or TCA to make the playoffs. Obviously, winning the majority of those would be huge, but winning at least one of those three will be big time for them. Now, like I said, this is a team that has good size up front. They have a stud in Pronte and a quarterback who showed flashes of greatness last year. I just feel like Campbell, he needs to put it together, and provide a good source of scoring for this offense here. At this point, I trust them to figure it out and have another skill player or so be the lead back, or, another wide receiver to add into the mix moving forward. There's always one that emerges for them every single year for Englewood. We just got to see who that is going to be going into this next season, but it should be a good year for Englewood, to say the least. Okay, moving forward, though, let's go ahead and talk about Kent Denver. Here is how that went here. Last season, they went 3-6 here. And, I predicted them to go 3-6, exactly 3-6 with a window of wins between 2 and 4. So there you go there. There were just a couple games different. I think there were 2 games specifically here, that were flipped. So let's go talk about it. To start, they lost a close one to Platte Valley, 21-20. Then they beat Highland 48-6 here. I thought that was going to be a Highland win, so that's one of the games that were flipped. Then they lost to Forge Christian 13-7. Following that, they would lose to Sterling here, kind of crazy, 28-26. Beat Denver West though, 20-6. Then lost to Elizabeth 31-14 against Alameda. Maybe this is an upset, or Alameda would forfeit to them. That's okay. That makes a lot more sense. Alameda would go ahead and forfeit to them. Then they would lose to TCA 49-7, then lose to Englewood 14-6 there. So there you go. I think that Englewood game was the other one that I got wrong, but still a close game. So just flip the Highland and Englewood game. But regardless, it still finished at 3-6 here. They had a new coach as well. It was the first year for new coach Riley Newcomer. And so going into this next season, there are some very interesting pieces. But before we talk about that, let's talk about some of the graduating seniors here. So unfortunately, it looks like Kent Denver did not take any stats at all here, or at least none that I could find. So that's tough. And then the few stats I was able to get were from Huddle videos, highlight reels, and sent to me. So there you go. So for the seniors, I'm just going to list off everyone that is a senior that will be leaving. So Charlie Walker at running back, Robert Jacoby, Waven Wells, August Penny, Flindershoff, and I think that is it here. Also, their Max Preps page is a little difficult to navigate as it's a literal mix of players from the season before and players with classes not listed. So that is definitely the best I can do there. Now, let's talk about key players going into this season here. Number 1, you have Luke Harrington. He returns here. He started a little bit here at quarterback, but I think he will be one of their main contributors here, more so on defense here. Maybe he gets thrown in as like a Wildcat quarterback every now and then, but I don't think that'll happen. But either way, I think he's a solid backup to have, a good athlete to have in there. But on defense at linebacker, he should definitely do the majority of the damage. They also have coming back at quarterback, I think this will be their starter, Yanni Balafis. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, but it looks like the freshman quarterback got some serious reps. A lot of his highlights, it looked like, were in the second half of the season where he played really well. Unfortunately, there are no stats, but if you just look at the film, he made some really great throws here. And so he is a smaller quarterback, I will say that, a little bit of a smaller frame, but like I said, has good athleticism, tough, has shown to make throws under pressure. I think he could be big time moving forward. I think they have someone special over there at Kent Denver going into his sophomore year. Now, they also bring back Rowdy Yates. The incoming senior should be due for another big season at outside linebacker, where he was super versatile between pass rushing, covering, and stopping the run. He's a key part of this defense. They also have Alexander Kim. First off, shout out to him for posting his stats on his film, but he was the captain of this team, and he had 54 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks, being an all-conference player. Him and Yates should form a really tough defense there. And then they also return, I want to talk about one more defensive player, and Alex Padalino. His junior year at safety, he had 87 tackles and 3 interceptions. He should be a key part of this defense. He has really good speed, good hitting, great coverage. Look for him to be a good receiver as well here. Just an all-around great athlete for Kent Denver. And then last but not least here, they return their 6'4", 200-pound receiver / tight end, Nicholas Buckshano, I want to say, is how you say that. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong. But he actually first popped up on our radar at a Ducks tryout here, 7v7 Ducks. Shout out to them and Coach Avio. And in his junior year, he saw 500 plus receiving yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. He should look to surpass those numbers going into his senior year. He's a tough receiver to stop. And against a 2A, state and conference and whatever here, he should really turn up against some good secondaries, as he did dominate in sevens as well against those type of corners. So that's a big time tight end / corner to be returning for them. And he will be an issue, probably an all playmaker guy, potentially a all PMC type of guy as well, maybe OPOY guy. Hey, if you put in stats, Kent Denver, that would help us out a lot. Also, it looks like, this could definitely be wrong, it looks like that their old coach is listed here as their head coach for 2023, and Scott Yates. I don't think that's correct, but I don't know. Who knows? Regardless, though, they have a talented squad. And so let's talk about 2023 and this schedule. Going in, they play Platte Valley to start. This will be a tough team, but I think this is a win. The defense needs to play Howdy Johnson better and key in on him. I'm looking at Harrington, Yates, and Kim to go get him. And then on offense, I think this team has enough firepower to get past them as well. So there you go there. Highland, they have a new coaching staff. That really should be a dub there. But look out for guys like Brogan Palmer is all I'm going to say. So we'll just see. Forge Christian should be a dub. They lose their quarterback, which means they'll probably lean on the running back V-Hill a little bit more there. And so if it comes down to it, I think Kent Denver can beat them if it comes down to one last drive. But for the most part, I think Kent Denver definitely wins this one. Then they play Sterling. This shouldn't have been a loss last year. So I'm just going to assume that they win this year, as Sterling does graduate a lot. So there you go there. Denver West should be a win. Could be closer, as they return in experienced defense, 2 good running backs, or 1 good running back and a really good athlete. But we'll just have to see what happens. They are at home, though, so I'm going to give this one to them. Then they play Elizabeth. That's a tough team. I think that's a loss here. They're going to play great defense and run down this clock, so with their 2 running backs and Cooper Connolly being the lead guy. So unless this Kent Denver defense could shut him down, I don't know if they win this one. So we'll see, though. It's definitely winnable. I'm just siding with Elizabeth here. Then they play Alameda. That should definitely be a win. TCA, I think that should be a win. That's one at home. I'm going to look to go to that game on October 21st there. TCA might have some size up front, but they are losing some significant skill players. Kent Denver, they need to make this a shootout. They need to score a bunch. You can't have too many 3-and-outs or, scoreless drives or turnovers. They got to go score, right? And I think this is definitely a big-time win that they could get. Then they play Englewood at home. This is another game that I might go to on Saturday. Close loss last year, but I think this year, this Kent Denver team should be good to go. This will be a good game, and this could potentially decide who goes to playoffs if it comes down to it, right? And so I have Kent Denver taking a huge leap forward at 8-1 with a window of wins between 6 and 9. This Kent Denver team has some serious talent. I am a little concerned about what's happening on the coaching staff. Maybe there's some miscommunications there. That's fine. But, both on offense and defense, they got guys coming back here. Size is another thing that I'm a little worried about, but they have good skill players. They have linebackers. They have quarterbacks. This Kent Denver team should be good enough to make the playoffs, in my opinion. And if they don't, then, I don't know. It comes down to coaching, I guess, right? These players should all take a step forward and be really good. And so we'll just have to see what happens moving forward for Kent Denver, but I like their squad going into this 2023 season. All right, but that'll wrap up this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast. Thank you so much for rocking with us. That's it. That's all our season previews. The football season starts this weekend. This weekend. Look out for more interviews, though. Not myself, but our interns, Gino and Gideon, will have their own episode. I get to interview them and really get their thoughts on this upcoming season. So look out for that. That should drop right after this episode here. So make sure you check that out. And then go support Colorado high school football. Get out there, check it out. If you want to learn more about teams, on the way there, on drives or whatever, hey, listen to one of our season previews at Playmakers Corner, anywhere you can listen to podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, also YouTube. Go ahead and leave us a good rating there, like, subscribe, all that great stuff. Let us know your thoughts, going into this 2023 season. Give us your predictions. How about that? That'll be really fun there. And then also on social media, you can find us there and message us there if you want at Playmakers Corner on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok as well. We're also on Twitter at Playmaker Corner, so check us out there. And we're going to be coming out with weekly recaps of games here. And also, I'm going to say this, I know there were a couple week 0 games. We're going to go ahead and bunch that with our week 1 recaps as well, just to make things easier, right? So with that being said, I have been your host, Simon Villanoz, aka Coach V, and I will catch you later.